Hey groupers, hope that you're ready to dig into Acts chapter 14. To break the ice, to get you talking first, I shared on Sunday about the time that I was in church here at Lakeside and the sanctuary was dark and I came up next to a lady who no longer a member of our church. She moved, but she looked a lot like Claudia and, well, she wasn't. I wonder about you. Have you ever mistaken someone for someone else? Or just sharing with one another, have you ever been mistaken for someone else? Just get talking about that. Just let everybody's voices warmed up before we dig into this story. And as we dig into this story, you know, we're still on the first missionary journey. Paul and Barnabas have landed on what is now modern-day Turkey, and they're working their way east across modern-day Turkey, and they come to this city called Iconium. Now, this is, in modern-day Turkey, a city that exists today. It's called Konya. It's the fourth largest city in Turkey. You think of Houston in the United States being our fourth largest city. It's their fourth largest city. First, a story about this section in the book of Acts that I just think that you'll like. The great Scottish chemist, his name's Sir William Ramsay, he receives the Nobel Prize in 1904 for some noble gases that he discovered. Well, he was also a pretty famous archaeologist in his own time, and he was a Christ follower. So as an archaeologist, he did things to explore the Bible. But what you may not know about Ramsay is that he was of a much more liberal bent to Christianity. He didn't really believe a lot of things in the Bible were accurate. He certainly believed the message of Jesus, but he didn't think that the Bible was very accurate. So he is working his way across Turkey, and there are no good maps for him to use to try to find places. And so he decides one night that he's going to look in his Bible. He's going to look in the book of Acts. He doesn't expect it to help him at all, but he's just frustrated for accurate maps. And so he opens up the book of Acts. He reads here in Acts chapter 14, even specifically verse 6, about Lystra. And the next day he sets out on this trip, trying to follow the path that Paul and Barnabas followed, not believing that it's true, but lo and behold, he finds the city of Lystra. He finds a statue there, and it was an undiscovered city. He finds a statue there to Zeus, and when he digs it up, and it changes his mind. He believes, and he becomes a pretty solid conservative Bible believer. Let's think you like that story. Well, in our first story, Luke writes that some refused to believe. Here were these Jewish people, and Paul and Barnabas come with the message of Christ, and many of them believe, but some of them don't. I wonder about you. Did any of you, in your stories, did you come from a religion into Christianity or into being born again, and some of your family didn't? They said, well, we don't believe that. What's that look like for you to be in a family with different faiths, and how has it been a challenge? Just talk about that. Now, another detail that I think that you'll enjoy is one of the Iconium relics. When we dig through Iconium, we found that there was a guy by the name of Onesiphorus, and he writes about the Apostle Paul, gives us a description of the Apostle Paul, that this is from this is from the 2nd century, so the 100s, but it's very close to the 1st century, and he says that he saw Paul, and then he describes him. Let me make sure that I do this correctly. He says that he was a man small in size. He says that he had a eyebrow that met. That's a very important detail. He said that he had a large nose, a bald head. He was bow-legged but strongly built. And then he goes on to say that he apparently was graced by God to look this way. I don't know, ladies, is that a look that we should be going for, we men? Unibrow, bald head, short, big nose, but strongly built. We do believe this is an accurate description of Paul. When we draw pictures of Paul, we make it look like this. Well, next, they travel to Lystra. And somewhat running from their lives because they had been run out of Iconium by the Jews. And then in Lystra, they preach, and they're considered to be gods. Now, to clear up some confusion, depending on what Bible that you have open in front of you, some Bibles say that they called them Zeus and Hermes. And other Bibles say that they called them Jupiter and Mercury. This is not a conflict in your Bible. It's just one more language thing. Zeus and Hermes, those are the names of these gods in Greek. In Latin, we called them Jupiter and Mercury. So if you're reading the King James Bible was translated largely from the Latin Vulgate, and so it says Jupiter and Mercury, and the New King James probably says that. The Revised Standard, a lot of other Bibles that followed in the footsteps of the King James say that. So just so you know, Jupiter, Mercury, Zeus, Hermes, those are the same folks. Now, in Lystra, a town that hadn't been reached by the Jews, Paul uses different tactics. He preaches about God using the basics. He starts with nature. He starts with creation. I'm curious, have any of you used nature to describe God to people? When you're witnessing to people, I'm wondering, have any of you used nature as the way that you witness? And if you have, well, share with your group. What part of nature do you use? Finally, Paul is stoned, but apparently not to death, probably in haste. These Jewish folks that had come in from out of town doing something that was illegal, as soon as Paul was knocked unconscious, they probably thought he was dead. Fortunately, Princess Bride language, he was only mostly dead. And so then they drug him outside, dumped his body in the trash heap, and they left. And the apostles came, or the church came and prayed around him, and the apostle was back to life. And then it says in the last verse, it says, and he marched back in to Lystra. I'm wondering what you think of this. Do you think that Paul that he's doing the right thing by going back into town? Or is this foolish behavior on Paul's part? I wonder what you think of Paul in this story. Well, every week, challenge you to write about what you like and what you don't like. What I really like in this story, well, I just think it's hilarious that they thought Paul and Barnabas were Zeus and Hermes. I just think that's funny. What do I not like? Well, certainly I cannot believe that these Jewish leaders have gone on a manhunt. They've tracked Paul and Barnabas a couple dozen miles, and some of them probably were from Pisidian Antioch, which is 100 miles. So they've been following Paul and Barnabas, trying to snuff them out, and I don't like that. Well, finally, just a reminder about our application. I challenge you to think about how you would share your faith with unchurched folks. First thing, I gave some steps. First, we have to go to them. They're not going to come to us. We have to go to them. Paul and Barnabas went to Lystra. Second, we need to create a hunger. When you get to know someone that's unchurched, you want to talk to them about Paul calls them the worthless things. You want to talk to them about the things in their lives that really are not lasting, the things in their lives that they're very dedicated to, but they won't last. Then share about creation is the next thing that Paul does. Use nature as your pulpit, and then share about joy. I love that Paul says that they experience joy. Share about what real joy is versus what happiness is, which goes away. And then share about God's patience, all of that leading up to sharing about Jesus. Well, I hope that you have a great group, and I look forward to seeing you next weekend as we continue our trek through the book of Acts. God bless.